ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our special guest today, Charlotte St. Martin. Wow, okay. That is a lot. Charlotte, it's so good to see you. You and I go back many, many years, more than we care to admit to the audience here today. But I think the first thing which would be helpful is, can you explain a little bit about the Broadway League and what its mission is?
The Broadway League, The Broadway League is the trade association representing commercial theater, not only in New York, but in 200 cities around the country. We were originally formed about 100 years ago to create a multi-employer bargaining unit, because we currently negotiate all 17 contracts for labor. And we still do that. We were formed for that, and we still do it. And we were also formed to fight fraudulent ticket brokers. But since that time, and we're still doing that too, but since that time, we have become really everything that a trade association does. We lobby. For example, after COVID, we lobbied and got close to $15 billion for venues and performing arts centers to help us get everyone open. We do educational programs. I'm passionate about education. When I was in your field, I chaired all 3 foundations for education of the big organizations, because our future is in education, and we have some significant programs. We also do, obviously, the Tony Awards, and we do a thing that Mike and I were just talking about called the Jimmy Awards, which is for high school musical theater students. And 150,000 kids compete from almost 2,000 schools to send 2 people from 46 regions to come to New York to apply for scholarships and win awards. And over 20 of those kids are performing right now on Broadway.
Yep,
one just opened last week as the lead in Back to the Future. So it's pretty exciting.
Yep.
It really is. And I know you're going with your granddaughter this evening to see Hadestown, and the young woman that plays the lead there was a finalist for us about 7 years ago. We have 97,000 people who depend on Broadway in New York City alone for their means of employment. But more fun than that, do you know that more people see a Broadway show in New York City on an annual basis than all 10 professional sports teams combined? We represent an economic impact to our city alone of almost $15 billion. So it's big business.
Yep.
People think of it as pure entertainment, but it's truly business, the good kind that makes us happy.
So I always like to kind of go back to the beginning of people's careers and find out. So you're a Dallas native, and your first job was at the iconic Fairmont Hotel in Dallas. Tell us a little bit about your start in the hospitality hotel industry.
Right. Well, I had 2 degrees and didn't like either one of them. I went to work for a congressman managing his congressional office, and had a degree in personnel, and I hated that. And the Fairmont Hotel was under construction, and a friend was working there and said, "You need to pay your rent. Why don't you join us? I think you'd like doing this." And I don't even know how I got this job, but I was in charge of events for the opening of the hotel. And I do love to plan a party and an event, and got to do it because the Fairmont was a spectacular hotel with a lot of meeting space. So I did that, and then that took me further.
But what you found during those days was this was a male-dominated business, and it was difficult for women in the industry, like yourself, starting out, to kind of move up, true?
Oh, absolutely. They didn't even know what to do with me. They just knew they needed to start bringing women into the fold.
Okay.
It was that there were just, if you weren't an assistant, secretary, a maid, front desk agent, you didn't work in hotels.
Right. So how did you start to bridge that gap? And I mean, you were, just starting out in your career, and then you ended up leaving the Fairmont and you went over to Loews.
Right. Well, I think what I would say, and I'm not sure it's as reliable of information today as it was then, but I did everything imaginable. I worked 80 hours a week, and when I was finished with the job I was paid for, I worked in other departments and did other things to learn the business completely.
Without getting paid for that?
Without getting paid for it. But it gave me so much experience that I was promoted quickly, and they didn't know what to do with me because I could do anything. And so I just kept getting promoted and happened to handle a major account for the largest real estate developer in Texas, and at the time in the country, who was building the Anatole, and he just would not take no for an answer. So I ended up being the first employee for the Loews Anatole Hotel and the last employee for the Loews Anatole.
As the president and CEO of the Loews Anatole Hotel.
That's right.
So that's an incredible achievement, having been the first employee starting out, so to speak, kind of at the bottom and working your way up. So I think everybody in the room, myself included, what are the things that you have done to be able to position yourself to get to that level of success? What are some of the secret recipes that you have in your career that has brought you where you are today?
Well, I never accepted the means of, this is the way it's always been done, so let's keep doing it that way. And I was fortunate to have a couple of the owners be very respectful of the different talents I was bringing. And so I was able to do things that had not been done before. And you know that within the industry, people talked about me as Broadway Charlotte. Well, I started hiring Broadway performers to perform for a convention that wasn't paying for it, just to make a name for the hotel, to create an environment that was, what I would say, entertainment, so that the hotel business wasn't just sleeping in a bed. But that probably the most important thing I did was volunteer and get involved with industry associations. I'm a huge believer in associations. I think the sum total is greater than the parts. You have to have a leader, passionate about leadership, but you can get groups of people together and change an industry. And I think that put a highlight and a spotlight on me that enabled me to be promoted probably before I would have been otherwise.
But there was also the networking that you were able to do, all the people you were able to meet through being on those committees and those boards at the Dallas level, and then later on the national level with organizations like MPI and PCMA and ASAE, et cetera, right?
Right. Well, and getting involved at the local level automatically got you involved at the national level because there were chapters. I mean, we were talking about MPI, and the year it was in Dallas at the Anatole, which was very early in its history, and we hosted it. But I was president of the MPI chapter there, and then of course that catapulted me into board and leadership positions, and that occurred with other organizations. I mean, there were many things that I was exposed to and many honors that I received probably before I should have, because there was a time when women were being brought more to the forefront, and it was like, we gotta give an award to a woman. I mean, I got the Supplier of the Year for MPI, and I'm not even sure why. And I'm very honest about that. There are certainly things that I did deserve that I got, probably because of the work that I did. But it was very important to be ever present, to do more, to always do what I said I would do, and more. If I said I would be somewhere, if I wasn't there, you know I was in a car wreck or dead, because I was going to be there. And I know that's not a trait that everybody has, but it worked.
Well, I think, again, for me and for many of us in the room, I mean, I just read part of your background and all the awards and all the recognition and all the boards that you have served on and currently serve on. And the big question for me is, how do you do that? How do you do your regular job and find the time to contribute to all those organizations and be able to respond to people? You are one of the most responsive people I've ever dealt with. I know that if I send Charlotte an email, she's going to be back to me like that. And that is a very hard skill set to have for most people. So what is your secret? Is this delegation? Tell us how you manage that.
I'm going to acknowledge today that I'm one of those people that lives to work. They say you're either you work to live or you live to work, and I don't feel guilty about it. I've been working since I was 12 years old. I love every minute of it. Certainly there are brutal days. We almost did a horrific strike about 10 days ago, and we were within 8 hours. I did not love that, but I loved the consensus building, the work toward eliminating that strike. And I think when you are that committed to what it is you do and you really love it, and I think that is a secret. What do they say? 80% of the people are in jobs they don't love. Well, I've never been in a job I didn't love for more than 3 months. And I think that I'm very fortunate that I learned that early. And I think it is what enables me to return my emails. I mean, I have a rule. I don't go home if I have mail that I haven't answered. So that's
So you're here till midnight last night. You've been a mentor to so many people, men and women, throughout the course of your career, but particularly to women. You have been a role model. And how important is that for all of us to be mentors?
Well, I think it's one of the most rewarding things that has ever been a part of my life. I mean, I'm thrilled to see so many women in this room. It would not have been that way when I started out. And I felt both an obligation, a responsibility, and a joy in bringing up. And you know that. I mean, we did things. I would hire people that had just had children and give them part-time work, and hire women that had been director of sales, head of departments, and let them work 23, 24 hours a week so that when they were ready to come back to work, they hadn't lost that skill set. And of course, I've got amazing talent, and it worked for both of us. And all of those women then started lifting up other women because they saw the value of that. And I think it's one of my reasons for having been successful in many things, because I have a lot of enormous support. As you all know, you don't do it alone.
Exactly. So there you were, you're in the hospitality industry. You had become the executive vice president of operations and
marketing
for all of those 20 properties, right? Moved here to New York, and you were with them for many, many years. And then how did the opportunity for the Broadway League come about?
Well, I had been passionate about theater. I have to fess up that I had to go to every property twice a year, once for budgets and once for quality inspection. And I went on the trip I got to take and plan personally, I would go to see what was showing in that city. I mean, I saw Evita in Los Angeles, things like that. I mean, I loved Broadway, and I used Broadway performers. And having chaired and been on the board of, an officer of, or chair of a trade association in the hospitality business, I was able to work between them to build consensus on, I remember we started the first hospitality diversity program, probably 40 years ago, 35 years ago, and I got ASAE, PCMA, MPI to work together to do that. So I got a reputation for being a consensus builder because I got 3 competitive organizations to work together. And that was pretty exciting.
But how did you end up at the Broadway League making the transition?
I forgot my trend of thought because
Okay.
I
I'm bringing you
immediately,
back.
thank you.
I'm bringing
I
you back.
immediately went there when I was thinking about that. So I had been traveling for 75% of the time for over 25 years. And one day I woke up and said, stick a fork in me, I cannot get on another plane. And the headhunter came to me and said, 3 different people have given us your name as somebody that could run this organization. You love theater, you've run trade associations, both as a paid head as well as a chair, an elected chair. And the number one thing they're looking at is someone who can build consensus. And that was what I was known for. So it was a fluke of nature. I mean, it was getting close to a time I should have started slowing down. And I had no intention of doing it, but that was the expectation. So I said yes, and I thought I'd do it 3 to 5 years, and
Here you
this
are.
is 17 years later.
Right. So how did your hospitality industry background help you when you made that jump into this whole new arena of the theater world? I mean, that also a male-dominated world, right?
Yes, and I'm very proud to say, ladies, that when I got there, the board was 45 people, and there were 3 women, and now it's a 3rd woman, and there's not one token in the group.
Great, great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But I mean, there's so much commonality between hospitality and Broadway. I mean, I went from putting butts in beds to butts in seats, and I said that directly, but there is that. But I do think the hospitality world, the meetings world, is made up of people who can do, they're master of all, you know, maybe not master of everything, but good at everything. And they can segment, pull out, figure out problems, figure out how to solve it. And that really used every one of my talents when I got to this job, because of course I knew nothing about running theater organization, but I knew how to run things. So it worked beautifully. I mean, it was a great act too.
So I guess it goes without saying that these last 3 years, so imagine this, folks, many of you may be aware of this. In March of 2020, all of Broadway, with this lady to my left being in charge, came to a grinding halt for 18 months. This would have been by far the worst experience of your career and the greatest challenge of your career. How did you get through it?
Well, it was probably the first time in my career when there was crisis involved that everybody had the same end goal in mind. And that really helped. But it was a crisis unlike, I can't even describe it, but I think the skills of being a 24/7 operator of hotels really prepared me for it, because I slept 4 or 5 hours a night if I was lucky. I did establish 44 task forces, had over 300 of our industry members on those task forces, divided it up. Each one took an area of what it was going to take to get us to return. And we, very much like you solve any problem, you separate it into what the areas of challenge are and get the right people in there to figure it out. And that's what we did. I mean, we literally met not all 18 months, 16 hours a day, but certainly the first year, because we never knew when they were going to turn the lights on.
Right.
And we had to be ready. And the hardest thing of all were protocols, because the federal government didn't agree with the state government, and they didn't agree with the local government. So we were the first out and the last in New York and across the country.
Yep. You've said in the past that one of the keys to your career trajectory has been getting involved in being an active volunteer, and you mentioned that. What else can you tell our audience today about some of the things that you've learned in your career in terms of just positioning yourself to keep moving ahead?
I mean, we all work with different types of people, and there are people who want to take credit for everything. And I think the best thing I learned early on, because I worked for Trammell Crow and he was that person, was if you're willing to not take credit, it's amazing what you can accomplish. And I still, to this day, I mean, there are things I do accomplish, but I never say that I accomplished them. You're making me say certain things that I accomplished, but I wouldn't say that out loud just to talk about it. Mm-hmm. I think that's an incredible trait to have if you can have it. I also have more energy than most 3 people. I don't know where that comes from. I'm glad I've got it because I do need it, especially at this age.
So this is something I wanted to ask you. So as president of the Broadway League, you are fortunate to be able to attend a lot of Broadway show openings and parties and Tony Awards and all of that. So during the course, just between us, what was your most thrilling moment? Who was the person that you met that you were just so thrilled? Because I know you've met hundreds.
Well, yes, I do. I have. So I knew you were going to ask me that question. So I have to separate it between the most in the hotels and the most in Broadway. In Broadway, hands down, Hugh Jackman is the most adorable, down-to-earth, charming, real human being I've ever met.
Really?
I mean, he is incredible. And oh, by the way, he's talented, good-looking, great singer, great dancer,
got it all.
Fun, got it all. In the hotel business, I met Prince Charles before he was king.
Wow.
And he was absolutely charming, delightful, and funny. And I'll never forget it. We had, in the Anatole, we had 165 suites. And because Trammell was a big Republican, most of them were named after famous Republicans. So we had a Ronald Reagan suite, a Gerald Ford suite, etc. Well, Nancy Reagan was chair of a benefit that it was for the Churchill Award that was being given to a Dallasite named Ross Perot. And Prince Charles was there to accept the award. And she wanted him to stay in the Ronald Reagan suite. And he wouldn't stay. So as I'm greeting him, I leaned over and I said, Nancy really wants you to stay in this suite. She won't check in until you do. And he leaned over and he kissed me on the cheek and he said, Charlotte, if you were coming, would you stay in the Reagan suite when she was here? And I went, you're right, I wouldn't. And then I saw him the rest of the day and he was so charming. So I think he'll be a great king.
So you are known for being able to manage very complicated, layered organizations and around a vision. So first, all of us, work for organizations where, we have to have a vision. We all have to be on the same page. But you've been able to do a wonderful job in terms of rallying the team and making sure that everybody shared that vision and implement the strategy and the plan. So what is your recipe for that? How did you come to be able to do that so well? What skill sets?
Well, I do think I was blessed with common sense.
That helps to start, right?
And not, common sense is not common. And I was blessed with a lot of it, very much like I talked about COVID. There were so many things. Marketing, getting people back to work, getting people trained on how to deal with all of the COVID protocols, figuring out how to open 42 shows all at once. Well, you can't, by the way. We had to stagger them. But it was outlining every single obstacle, breaking it down to a more simple, if there's such a thing, act and getting the people that have the skill sets to do that, and then pull them together. But I do think the people who are blessed with vision and know how to communicate that vision and hold people accountable for that vision are the more successful people. I mean, my strategic plan is updated every year, and the goals of my department heads are tied to that plan. Their people's goals are tied to their goals, so that it's very clear about what we want to accomplish. And I think it's just using common sense and figuring out how you're going to get there. I mean, people get there different ways.
But clarity of communication with everybody. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem for all of us, is the communication issue. Last question. What would you tell your 21-year-old self?
Oh my goodness. Because I was kind of the first woman to have every position, as Marin said, and I was alone, I considered myself accountable for all women. And I think I didn't take jobs that were offered as soon as I should have. I don't know that that's a failure, but I would say you don't have to carry the weight of the whole women's world on your back. And I might have made more money earlier and been more successful earlier. But I don't know for sure. I've been fortunate.
You have been. Charlotte, we can't thank you enough for spending this time with us and for sharing your wisdom and your experience and all the things that you talked to us about today. And we really, really appreciate that so much, for taking the time to be with us. Thank you very much, Marin.
Thank you.